Fala galera do canal, me chamo Julien e no vídeo de hoje veremos Americanos, falando tanto sobre o Brasil como dos Brics em si. A tradução foi feita pelo próprio YouTube, mas dá pra entender perfeitamente. Então deixe seu like, inscreva-se no nosso canal para ajudar na divulgação e valeu!
International alliance of multiple countries has been pushing to dethrone the dollar. And now they've added more key members. Dale Hurd brings us this look at their mission to transform how the world does business.
These countries comprise almost half of the world's population, hold close to half the world's oil, and want to dethrone the dollar as the world's reserve currency. Known as Brics, this collection of emerging economies whose name is an acronym for members Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, doubled in size on January 1st, adding Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. More than 30 other nations have expressed interest in joining this group that wants to ditch the dollar and establish a new global economic order. Currency expert James Rickards blames the U.S. government for creating this economic rival.
You could ask, why is this going on at all? And the answer is we've turned the dollar into a weapon, and if you're on the receiving end of that, Russia found out the hard way. But if you're China, Brazil, India, a lot of other countries, what you're asking yourself right now is, hey, what happens if the United States wakes up one day and decides they don't like what I'm doing? It doesn't have to be invading Ukraine. It could be any policy you think of. Are they going to do this to me? Freeze my reserves, freeze my securities, kick me out of SWIFT, etc.
Whether Brics could actually create a currency to surpass the dollar is up for debate.
While the threat of a Brics currency overtaking the dollar makes some nervous, many experts see too many obstacles in the way of that happening anytime soon.
About 60% of global reserves are in securities denominated in dollars. So the U.S. ends up being the dominant reserve currency. Now, that's not easy to unseat. Even if you don't like the dollar, you have to ask yourself, well, where is there a securities market big enough to absorb these savings? And there isn't one.
Financial analyst Peter Earle.
For Brics currency to really take off, they would have to come up with something better than the dollar, quite simply. But it's not simple to do. Of the many ideas that have been thrown around, only gold or maybe some sort of stable coin, which is a specialized inflation-resistant cryptocurrency, would have a chance.
This alliance also looks very unstable politically. Brics can only make decisions unanimously. And yet two of its members, India and China, have fought one another on their border. New members Egypt and Ethiopia are fighting over water from the Nile River. And Saudi Arabia and Iran are arch-enemies in the Middle East. What Brics could accomplish is to further weaken the dollar by no longer using it as a payment currency between member nations, which would make your dollars worth less.
It is important. It does reduce the role of the dollar. It could be inflationary in the U.S. If dollars are less in demand, they may be worth less.
But replacing the dollar as the world reserve currency is not likely anytime soon. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Well, it may be unlikely soon, but I think it's eventual. And the reason I think that is that they want to overthrow the dollar. A lot of that has to do with our own government and these the use of the dollar to float our own economy and to float our own deficit, which is now 32 trillion. We've done that under a concept called new money theory, that it doesn't really matter how much the government spends, that the world is essentially backing our credit card. And as long as the dollar is the international currency, we don't need to worry about inflation, and we don't need to worry about devaluing the currency by overspending here. The world has awakened to it. China, a decade ago, famously came to the United States with a question: are you going to monetize your debt? And that was back when the deficit, I believe, was under 5 trillion. So they were worried then. Imagine how worried they are now at 32. And are we just going to print our way out of our deficit and flood the world markets with dollars and use the dollar as a backstop to our overspending? We've been doing that practically. If we start printing dollars to pay off our own debt, well, then we're going to do it actually. So the world is saying, well, that doesn't make any sense. We don't want to pay your credit card. We want to have our own thing. In the short term, here's what's going to happen. Saudi Arabia is going to start selling its oil to China for these new BRIC payments, and Brazil's going to start selling its beef for the same thing. And in that, there's going to be less demand for dollars. And so our deficit spending is really going to get painful, and that will happen very quickly.
Então, quando eu olhei esse vídeo, eu resolvi trazer na hora aqui pro canal. Mesmo que a tradução seja pelo YouTube, já que eu não compreendo muito bem o inglês, porque é um vídeo extremamente enriquecedor e traz outro tipo de visão sobre os BRICS em si, uma visão bastante realista do que pode acontecer e do que, segundo eles, provavelmente irá acontecer. Mas o vídeo foi esse, espero que vocês tenham gostado, deixe seu like, inscreva-se no nosso canal para ajudar na divulgação e valeu!